With the release of the Wii U, Nintendo has started to move away from their 7th generation console, the Wii. In its prime, the Wii had a vast and thoroughly impressive collection of games, and while you may have seen the best of the console now that the Wii U has started to find its feet, you're still totally spoilt for choice. And because it's an old-ish console, some of these great games are really cheap if you look hard enough. So you may be able to remember that I set up a voting contest on this topic a couple of months ago. Yeah, I know, I've been busy with other things, sorry about that. And now is the time we put that all together. You voted in your thousands on over 90 different Wii games, and the results are finally in. Just remember that I had no input in this list. The entries on here are decided by you, so if you've got a problem with any part of the countdown, it's your own fault. Anyway, shall we? One advantage of having such a wide topic like this to talk about is that games I've already talked about before turn up, especially in this case because I only ever talk about the best games, right? Just over a year ago, I talked about Super Paper Mario, and because I hadn't played it at that point, most of what I said was from vague impressions and from watching Let's Plays. A year on from that, let's do it properly. For how relatively simple main series Mario games have become in recent years, the spin-offs have often been a great source for seeing how clever Nintendo can be. The Paper Mario series in particular has its own special following, people who adore the mix of Mario and RPG elements in one addictive little package. Both Paper Mario on the N64 and Paper Mario The 1000-Year Door were a huge success, both seen as Mario games with gripping and engaging stories. For the tricky third album, Nintendo went for the extreme ends of the spectrum. While Super Paper Mario may still look like the previous games, it plays absolutely nothing like them at all. We're straight back to classic Mario over here, jumping around, squashing Goombas and using power-ups. But don't let this gameplay change fool you, there are still some significant similarities. One of the greatest aspects of these spin-offs is the enthralling story, and Super Paper Mario is absolutely no exception, containing, honest to God, one of the best stories ever stuck into a Mario game. You think that Mario can't be emotional, this is the game that will prove you so very wrong. Super Paper Mario may have departed somewhat from the RPG style combat that people love so much, but the replacement is an intriguing rendition of classic Mario. It's kind of the best of both worlds, really. Nintendo's often been branded as the kid-friendly gaming company, churning out games that engross and enlighten your childhood. And that's pretty true actually, I spent a ton of my childhood wrapped around the Game Boy Advance playing the shit out of Pokemon Gold. But what about the modern day? Would they still let their console be saturated with happy, cuddly games? Well, not entirely. You ever come home in a bit of a funk, ever had such a bad day that you need something incredibly violent and stupid to cheer you up? If that's the case, Mad World couldn't be better suited to your predicament. Quite a few games have recently taken on an arcade style of gameplay where you rack up points based on what you do and how successfully you do it, in a sort of homage to the high score obsesses from the old arcade games. Mad World is one such game where you take hold of big guy with arm mounted chainsaw Jack and in short, kill people in the most creative ways possible, gaining more points for how much effort you put into each kill. I mean, you can just go around whacking people like no tomorrow, but you get more points for, let's say, improving your kill. You could punch someone to death, but it's much more fun to ram a signpost through their head and throw them onto a wall of spikes. It's a good day. Even so, the game throws in some truly incredible boss fights, ranging from the stupid and broken fight with the Shamans to the great one-on-one duels with the Yokozuna and Herr Friedrich von Twirlenkiller. You start to get the sense with this game that when you're turning henchmen into blood fountains with road signs stuck through their heads, that the game's going to have something special for a boss fight, and hot damn, they're not half bad, are they? In short, Mad World isn't a very complicated game. I think there was a plot in there somewhere, but I wasn't really paying attention to that, and the only colour crayon they had was red. The combination of ultra-violent combat, the hilarious commentary from Death Watch's duo of Howard and Kreese,
Ken Pontac and Warren Graf. I hate those guys. They're always putting words in my mouth. I think they're on drugs.
and the rewarding boss battles at the end make this game one that is very satisfying at the very least. One where you can gratify your lust for gratuitous violence. Yes, I know these things. Let's go all the way back to 2001 and the release of Sonic Adventure 2. It was a hit, received as one of the best 3D Sonic games of all time and one of the best games on the Sega Dreamcast. Even now, it's still accepted as one of the all-time greatest Sonic games, even after 12 years of subsequent Sonic games. And while it is a very good game, that doesn't paint the Sonic franchise that followed it in the best of lights. You see, after Sonic Adventure 2, Sega decided to do a lot of drugs and make a ton of Sonic games that were either experimental, controversial, or an abomination unto the world of sane mortals. The leap into the next age of gaming was more like a drunken stumble, and it took them quite a while to recover from it. They had a couple of highlights in that time. Some people will say that Sonic Adventure had some great werehog sections, but we had to wait until 2010 before Sega were back on their game. Sonic Colors. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really care much for Sonic, just a personal preference thing. I never really grew up with it, but whatever. The reason why I bring this up is because I never really got into the mould of waiting for a Sonic game that would compare to Sonic Adventure 2, and being disappointed at pretty much every game that came after it. That meant that my experience of Sonic Colors is a ton different to the majority of Sonic fans, and I actually played it before Sonic Adventure 2, so just roll with me here. What makes Sonic Colors such a success is not taking too many risks like the werehog sections in Unleashed, or giving Sonic a fucking sword, and taking what the previous Sonic games did well and sticking it all in one game. The big game-changing aspect of Sonic Colors is the introduction of the Wisps, little colourful alien guys that Eggman is trying to capture to make his theme park more evil or something. But I think what makes the Wisps such a great addition in this game is that they don't dramatically alter the gameplay that defines a Sonic game. Previous games brought in big new add-ons that didn't always make everyone happy, but Colors keeps it very simple and incredibly effective. The kind of Sonic game that people have been wanting for a long time. Plain and simple, a Sonic game. I hate the world. So you guys want me to talk and presumably praise Super Mario Galaxy 2 in a professional and 100% sincere way. You want me to honour your decision to include a game of this quality in this countdown. Okay, I shall comply. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is the sequel to the critically acclaimed, commercially successful, and truly wonderful Super Mario Galaxy, and it introduces a smorgasbord of creative and innovative gaming elements. Such ingenious ideas include the reintroduction of Yoshi, which is used in every level in the game, replacing the one-dimensional Rosalina and incredibly boring Comet Observatory with a giant purple Luma and a spaceship with Mario's face on it, and condensing the expansive worlds of Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario 64 into a much more accessible linear style of level design so you can't possibly get lost. In order to add an extra layer of content to the game, it didn't really need it, but whatever. Upon the game's completion, you can go through all the levels again, collecting more stars, except this time, where the stars are now green. And I like green, it's a very creative colour, and I feel it shows the creativity of Nintendo to put these... Okay, no, I can't do it. Number 12 is Super Mario Galaxy 2. I'm done. Next entry, please. So maybe you've been playing Mad World a lot and you want a game with a little more substance. You still want to make people explode in spectacular bloody displays, but maybe the game could have a bit more to it. Roll in No More Heroes 2, people.
It's called fashionably late fuckface.
Aw damn, now we're getting into some really good games. Mad World may have come out around the same time as No More Heroes 2, but the comparisons between the two are very evident. You have two action-slashy games with two stylish protagonists with two amazing weapons fighting their ways up a ranking system to the top. The difference here, if it wasn't obvious enough already, is that No More Heroes 2 is a sequel. Don't worry, I'll give you time to recover from the shock. The fact that Desperate Struggle is a second installment means more than you might think. A sequel is just a fancy word for game that needs to be different to the first one. And Desperate Struggle, while still having the motley casting of Travis, Sylvia, and Mr. Sir Henry Motherfucker, it gives off a very different tone to that of its predecessor. The stylish combat's still there, the brilliant boss battles are kicking about somewhere, but what makes this game different from the first is its story. The violence that Travis involves himself in takes on a more personal touch when his best friend Bishop is assassinated by this guy's henchman. Suddenly, it's all about revenge and working your way up to the top to bury your beam katana in his stupid face. Which you don't actually get to do, but let's move on. You guys.
That's fucked up!
If there's ever a sign of how similar these games are in the eyes of fans, the fact that they are separated by one vote is a pretty good one. The original No More Heroes is the game that started all of this off, the tale of an incredibly horny otaku called Travis Touchdown who wants to reach the top of the United Assassins Associations so that Sylvia Crystal will help him hide the salami, if you know what I mean. Along the way, Travis fights his way through some spectacular and at times ridiculous boss fights while earning cash for the fight in the game's surprisingly solid overworld. The sequel didn't actually have an overworld per se, just a menu screen where you could play minigames, but you didn't need to pay for ranked fights. Driving around on your bike, picking up coconuts and scorpions was all part of the No More Heroes money-grabbing experience that broke up the boss fights, and it was a nice change of pace in the game that I felt was absent in the sequel. So for me, this placement is fully justified. I feel like the original No More Heroes is fractionally better than Desperate Struggle. It's got more bosses that I like and a final boss that is ungodly satisfying, and overall, it just seems better rounded. I know that's a very vague thing to say, but it's honestly what I think. It might not be as complicated story-wise, but it's hella fun, and that's just fine with me. Shigeru Miyamoto once stated that he always wanted to make a 4-player Mario game. Gamers have been through various different types of Mario games, and especially from the main series, we've had some pretty shining highlights. But of course, could you imagine how cool this would be with 3 extra players? Oh, it'd be something I could never comprehend, it'd be so good! You're thinking that I'm going to talk about New Super Mario Bros. Wii, right? Well, you'd be absolutely 100% wrong. Okay Nintendo, I like this 4-player Mario game you're throwing down, but what about a 4-player Kirby game? Now that is a very interesting concept. I guess it's up to personal preference whether or not you'll find a multiplayer Kirby game more exciting than a multiplayer Super Mario game, but the thought of 4 players playing a Kirby game at the same time is for me a ton more intriguing. For all it is, Mario is at its core very basic. You're a fat Italian plumber jumping around the place picking up power-ups, shrooms and maybe a green dinosaur if you're lucky. Kirby games though, you're a pink puffball whose abilities are determined by the enemies you inhale, which leads to a wider choice of gameplay and different ways of playing the same level with a variety of power-ups. 4-player Kirby proves to be hectic, enjoyable chaos, as Kirby's Return to Dreamland provides a spectacular blend of addictive gameplay and pleasing presentation that'll keep you engrossed for a very long time. It stands as honest to god the prettiest Kirby game out there, with a gorgeously orchestrated soundtrack that I just keep coming back to, and yet, despite this, it still keeps the classic Kirby formula at its core. It's basically a normal Kirby game, times 4, and with more bells and whistles than a troupe of Morris dancers. Not to mention that it's a lot more multiplayer friendly than New Super Mario Bros. Wii, choosing to make your friends and fellow players helpful, not a hindrance to your enjoyment. Makes sense, I guess. Let's talk Metroid. Prior to the GameCube, Metroid was a strictly 2D game series, following that pattern ever since its introduction in 1986 and up until the supreme Super Metroid in 1994. 8 years later, and a year after the release of the GameCube, Retro Studios put their collective hat in the ring and blessed the gaming world with Metroid Prime, an immersive and hugely impressive first-person adventure Metroid game that still stands as one of the best games of all time, let alone as a great member of the franchise. 2 more games followed it, with the third game, Corruption, making its way onto the Wii. Metroid Prime 3 was in particular a success, mostly due to it simply being on the Wii with pointer controls used for stuff like aiming and looking around. It felt very natural, like an upgrade on what already felt like a very immersive series. So guess what happened next? Yep, they put the other 2 games on the Wii as well, in a trilogy, with the third Metroid Prime Trilogy, everyone. This makes an embarrassingly huge amount of sense, so much sense that it's not even slightly funny. When you have this technology at your disposal, there's a couple of applications for it that absolutely 10,000% have to be done, and done as well as physically possible. Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes were great games on the GameCube, but on the Wii with pointer controls, oh god, it's just too much, it's too much. I mean, what can I say, they're basically the same game, the same 3 glorious entries into the Prime series, but now they control even better. It would have been one thing if they re-released something like Metroid Prime on the Wii, Nintendo did something like Pikmin 2, and before anyone pointed out, Metroid Prime 2. But what Nintendo did was candy-coated fan service, sticking all 3 games on the same optical disc, providing more hours of gameplay than your puny mind can feasibly comprehend. I wasted virtually an entire week playing through these 3 games, and I can tell you, it was time very well spent. So we're up to number 7, and for the first of only 2 occasions on this list, I have to talk about a game that I know very little about. I guess that says more about my taste in video games than anything else, right? Probably, but at any rate, here's Monster Hunter Tri, or Tree. For those of you who don't know a lot about this game, don't worry, you're not alone. Monster Hunter Tri is, you've guessed it, the 3rd installment in Capcom's action RPG series, and the first one to make it onto a Nintendo console. It's also the first main series Monster Hunter game to make it out of Japan since 2004, which was, incidentally, the first game in the series. Let's just ignore the PSP games based off Monster Hunter 2, they're not quite the same game. So what's so special about this game where you run about killing big monsters? How can I sell you this as a concept? Well, for starters, just take a peek at it. It's no Mona Lisa, but for a Wii game this is very impressive. Kinda reminds me of Skyrim's overworld, or maybe Skyrim reminds me of Monster Hunter Tri. Skyrim did come out after. And actually the Skyrim comparisons don't stop there. The game is huge, with a fully fleshed out single player campaign with buckets to do as you waltz around carving up giant dinosaur monster things. The combat is typical action RPG. I have a big sword, and I'm gonna make it friends with this monster's skull, and it's gonna like it. You can even do some business underwater if you wish, maybe fighting monsters underwater is your kind of thing, I don't know. But being serious for a second, for how little I know about this game, I assure you that it's very much worth your time. Reviewers have fallen in love with this thing, throwing around 9s and 10s like they're going out of fashion. It's been praised for having a hugely satisfying combat system, feeling more like an enjoyable experience rather than an exercise in killing time, like so many standard RPGs sometimes fall victim to. All I'm saying here is that you should definitely think about buying this thing, as long as you buy the Ultimate version, because they discontinued the excellent online multiplayer for the Wii, while improving it for the Wii U and 3DS editions. So if you have a Wii U, get the Wii U version rather than the Wii one. This tidbit of consumer advice brought to you by me. You may know if you've looked around a bit at the Wii's game library that the Wii's had its fair share of ports. It makes a ton of sense, give the game some clever new controls to enhance the gaming experience and make your game even more immersive than it already was. We've already seen it with Metroid Prime Trilogy, but arguably the best example of this concept comes with Okami. Welcome to the heavyweight division, guys, the big hitting big names of the Premier Wii division. Okami very much deserves its place as one of the best Wii games, despite starting life and enjoying life as a PS2 game. However, like so many others, the lore of pointer controls proved to be enough for a Wii port to be made, and from my standpoint, thank God for that decision. People seem to be split down the middle, either people worship the ground it walks on, or people find and talk about the many flaws they can find in the game. And you know, you're not allowed to talk about flaws in a beloved game, that makes you the bad guy. But whatever, I'm rather predictably on the slight reserve side of oh my god, this game's amazing, I love you Capcom. Again, like Monster Hunter Tri, the visuals are mesmerising, but this time for a different reason. They're still good, but the art style is literally that, Japanese ink art. I can't think of too many games on any console that look as nice as Okami in full flow. It really is something you can sit back and admire. But let's move on from visuals and onto what made it a Wii game, those controls. In Okami, the pointer controls are primarily used to control the Celestial Brush, a magical brush that allows you to interact with the environment in front of you by drawing certain symbols. This works fine on the PS2, but the Wii makes this feel a little bit more natural. It's kind of like using Photoshop with a computer mouse in comparison to using it with a graphics tablet. The PS2 version is very reliable but kind of too safe and almost, dare I say, boring. While the Wii game is more fluid, it isn't necessarily foolproof because sometimes the game decides to argue with you about what a circle looks like. For all of Okami's flaws, of which there are some, but I'm not allowed to mention them because fanboys will eat me again, they don't subtract from an overall phenomenal game. With a solid story based off Japanese mythology, controls that at the very least feel natural, visuals that genuinely leave me a little awestruck, and a soundtrack that I still play while scripting countdowns, this is a game that you really should check out at some point, even if you've played the PS2 version, because those Wii controls are a lot of fun sometimes. It's a classic in all the senses of the word. Except the being old bit, the Wii version is only 5 years old. Roll up, we're at the second game I know next to nothing about. This time we're not talking about some monster-slaying Capcom action RPG thing. Of course, we're talking about a full-blown RPG epic. It's none other than Xenoblade Chronicles. If Monster Hunter Tri was loved by critics, this game was turned into a prophetic idol. Its review portfolio is awash with 9 out of 10s and gold stars just everywhere. There's something about this RPG that people seem to like. I don't know, what could it be? Well, part of the status this game has in the gaming world has to do with its localization. While this game doesn't actually involve me because I talk like this and not like this, Americans campaigned to get this game and 2 other similar JRPGs localized and shipped to American shores, 2 years after it was released in Japan and a year after it was released over here in Europe. The thing is, when something starts being popular in the USA, that popularity tends to escalate rather quickly. One thing led to another. Xenoblade Chronicles was hailed as the greatest JRPG of its generation and as the second coming of Earthbound, and it's now one of the most popular Wii games of all time. Not bad, eh? So let's dive right into this thing. Let's see what amazing features we can find. Oh my days, British voice actors. Sorry about that. So Xenoblade Chronicles is a typical big RPG, which means typically massive story, and an engrossing one at that. I won't go into details because even I don't really know what's going on. Yeah, I should have done some research, but shut up. But being honest, the best RPGs have never struggled to come up with a good story. The things that usually split a good RPG from a great RPG is that old adage of gameplay, and thankfully, this is again something that Xenoblade Chronicles sorts out with ease. The combat system is fairly automatic, but you've still got special attacks that you can activate manually for that extra bit of eat this bitch. What I do like in particular is how open the overworld is in this game, taking on an almost MMORPG feel. It's so big. So if you do get bored of the gripping story, you can just mill about exploring the world if you like. Big fan of massive overworlds, me. The only problem that leaps out at me is the price. I know we still have new Battlefields and Call of Duties that are over 50 quid a piece, but buying Xenoblade Chronicles puts you back a similar sort of price. Though, let's be brutally honest here, if you were British and had 50 quid to spend on a game, and with the choice of Battlefield, Call of Duty or Xenoblade Chronicles, which would you pick? My point exactly. So far we've had a lot of different series on this countdown, ranging from Mario and spin-offs to Monster Hunter and No More Heroes. But I don't know about you, but aren't we missing something here? There seems to be a pretty big void on this countdown so far. Did Hideo Kojima ever make a Metal Gear game for the Wii? Nah, don't think so. That must mean that we've yet to see a Zelda game. It was about time really. Bring in Twilight Princess! This is a funny game for me. I may spend time being blinded by nostalgia for other games, but I mostly don't give this game a lot of credit. And that in itself is a shame, because it's not like Twilight Princess is a bad game. It's at number 4 for a reason, so it must be pretty good. I do have a couple of issues with it, like the general lack of light, which, yeah, it can be solved by upping the brightness of your TV, but you then go somewhere lighter like Gerudo Desert during the day, and oh god! But to be honest, when we're looking around for great big massive turd-shaped faults, that's all I can come up with, and even then, it's not really enough to detract from a very solid game. Twilight Princess acts as a step in a different direction after Nintendo's obsession with the cel shading that worked so well for Wind Waker. People were asking for a realistic Zelda game, especially as the last one was Majora's Mask, and that was a good 6 years before. The end result was very impressive, combining the controls brought forth in Ocarina of Time with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck to make, until the release of Skyward Sword, the most physically engaging Zelda game. It also boasts a cracking plot, with perennial bad guy Ganon taking the backseat from the most game, and the limelight given to the volatile Zant, who takes over Hyrule and drowns it in Twilight, causing Link here to turn into a wolf. Gameplay is therefore split between the traditional Zelda that gamers were used to, and Wolf Link that proved to be more agile and with a different style of combat. You don't have the same equipment as regular Link, but it's an interesting layer added onto Twilight Princess's gameplay, and to be honest, it's a fresh new idea for the Zelda series. Overall, Twilight Princess is undoubtedly a fantastic game, one that takes a couple of risks and succeeds with basically all of them. For me personally, it's still behind the trio of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask and Wind Waker, but with a game like this, it's not because it's not very good. Far from it. If you need a Wii game that'll engage you and keep you enthralled until the very end, this will do that without much trouble. There are some staples that you can expect on a Nintendo console, and even with the introduction of new series, there has been some that have stayed the hot topic for a long time. In 1996, we got Super Mario 64. In 2002, we got Super Mario Sunshine. And 5 years later, we got borderline perfection. Oh yeah, here we go. If it wasn't for Super Mario World, which incidentally is my favourite Mario game for more personal reasons, Super Mario Galaxy would be the undisputed master of Super Mario games. But before I start gushing over this game, let's take a different stance and look at the things it did wrong. The things that stop it from being perfect. For a start, this game seemed to go for sheer quantity of levels over having lots of different episodes, in just a handful of levels like what Super Mario Sunshine did. You could argue that creates a wider variety of environments, but I always liked exploring the levels in Super Mario Sunshine to their fullest. They did have about 11 shines per level, at which point you could argue that Super Mario Galaxy went for quantity over quality, as a lot of the levels are fixed on linear tracks. Summed up very well by the launch stars that literally, launch you in the right direction. This would be a perfectly valid complaint if the levels weren't incredibly fucking amazing. Yeah, the levels are on a bit of a fixed track, but it's like being on interactive Safari. The presentation is absolutely staggering at times, with the sharpest visuals in any Super Mario game to date, and a soundtrack that still measures up as one of the greatest to ever be put in a video game. Factor in some suitable eye candy levels and the core Mario gameplay mechanics that we've grown to love over the years, and suddenly, it doesn't matter that the levels are so linear. Not to mention that Super Mario Galaxy houses probably my favourite character in any Mario game, in Rosalina. A character who not only watches over the Comet Observatory and all the Lumas, but also has one of the most tragic backstories in the history of the franchise. Yeah, it's a Super Mario game with a story and complex characters. I never thought I'd see the day, frankly. Super Mario Galaxy has one thing that the previous main series Mario games didn't have: polish. Super Mario Sunshine definitely felt in places that it was a little rough around the edges, and with Super Mario 64 being the first 3D Mario game, Nintendo hadn't quite perfected the formula yet. The whole of Super Mario Galaxy stands as potentially the best Mario game of all time, and one of the greatest Wii games as well. It was in fact so good that when Nintendo tried to make a sequel in Super Mario Galaxy 2, the list of things they could have done to improve the game was just add Yoshi. And that says a lot, really. Here we go again. I feel like I've been here before. For the third time in just a couple of weeks, I'm going to talk about Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Previous occasions like this have been interesting, and now I've got to explain my thoughts about Skyward Sword without sounding like a bad guy. So since I've explained in great depth what flaws this game has, let's talk about the happiest side of the spectrum. What this game did right. First off, I kind of like the art style Nintendo went for. It is a mix between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, but it quite literally goes for art-like visuals, taking inspiration from Paul Cézanne's style, who was this painter guy from about 100 years ago, drew some nice pictures and stuff. The end result is surprisingly natural feeling environments, while still feeling just a little bit cartoony. Pretty much a middle ground between realism and cel shading. There's also the much publicised one-to-one swordplay, and while many people seem to find problems with it, it worked perfectly about 95% of the time. I get a little frustrated when I have to recalibrate it after leaving the game a while, but if it gets it working I don't have too many complaints. Using the Wii Motion Plus sword combat feels very immersive, more so than any other Zelda game to date. Gone are the days of insane bits of dodging and parry attacks, and in its place is a mostly realistic style of combat that keeps the player at the forefront of every battle. We also of course have an interesting array of characters, with Bruce and Girahim being the absolute standouts, writing themselves into the Zelda Hall of Fame for years to come. As a bonus, we also have a much closer to home Zelda, so you actually care about saving her from the world below. The story's unfortunately a bit thin in places, but it's chock full of fantastically memorable moments along the way. For me though, the game's crowning achievement is the dungeons. Gameplay outside the dungeons is relatively decent, okay, but nothing groundbreaking. Taking a step inside these glorious dungeons reveals an experience unlike anything since Ocarina of Time, with ingenious puzzles and spectacular bosses. These really are the brightest highlights in this game for me. In summary, denying Skyward Sword its credit probably isn't the way to go. There are a great number of positives in this game. Does this game have flaws? Yes. Does it stop the game from being perfect? Oh god yes. Does it stop the game from being a great Zelda game? Hell no. It's still a cracking game and one you really have to experience at some stage. It's a great game to waste your time with. No, wait, that's not what I mean at all. So, what do you think is the greatest Wii game of them all? Maybe it was one of the launch games like Twilight Princess, or one of the more recent ones like Xenoblade Chronicles. Well, whatever your preference is, over 1 in 5 votes were for this game in particular. So at the very least, number 1 should be a fairly popular choice. It couldn't be anything other than Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Let's be honest here, you must have seen this coming. When this game was going through development and rumours were being leaked out and updated, I don't remember a game that had hype like it. After the huge success of Super Smash Bros. Melee on the GameCube, people expected, no, demanded, that Super Smash Bros. Brawl expanded and improved on it with the Wii installment. The build-up was gigantic, something incredible. The internet was awash with anticipation and excitement, and the end result was pretty special. I still prefer Melee over Brawl because the combat in Melee is just a little bit tighter and faster, but Brawl as a concept astounds me. With a roster of 35 different characters, it's the largest Super Smash Bros. Game to date, boasting a giant collection of different franchises and giving some exposure to some lesser known game series with the inclusion of a specific character. It also contains a ridiculously huge single player mode, Wi-Fi capability, and the ability to save video replays. Things that were really missing in Melee, although you wouldn't expect most of them from a GameCube game. Of course, this game isn't without faults, but you know what? I honestly don't really mind them all that much. Super Smash Bros. Brawl still provides one of the most enthralling multiplayer experiences on the Wii, and seems to be one of those games that even people who aren't particularly interested in gaming have played and enjoyed. It's a game that pleases the masses, and with Namco Bandai working with Nintendo towards the next 2 Smash Bros. Games, we could well see something similar with Super Smash Bros. Wii U and 3DS. This has been rabbidluigi, and even though I think Super Smash Bros. Melee is more fun to play, Super Smash Bros. Brawl is the epic multiplayer game that set an incredible benchmark in the series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.